All right, so we're going to start off talking about domestic church today. Domestic church is something that's kind of been like an underlying current in a lot of the readings. So we're going to make it more explicit through this lecture. It looks a lot on what social justice and the family mean. So there's, first of all, the issue of social justice within the family. Women and men's participation both in public and private spheres must be equally valued, welcome, and encouraged. So to kind of counteract the tendencies that we have within our society right now, we need to really encourage women within the public sphere, and we need to encourage men in the domestic sphere. So this comic kind of illustrates it. Today I cleaned the house, did the laundry, bathed the kids, and landed the Hollister account. What's for dinner, honey? So kind of only affirming what she does in the domestic sphere. So we can see how we need to kind of counterbalance each of these tendencies, these gendered expectations. There's been this tendency, even among the most progressive Catholics, to divide the social justice and the love spheres into separate gendered areas. So men go out and save the world, women stay in and save the home. We can see this like in Jonah House and Catholic Workers. There's been other studies of people who work within Jonah House, which is like a really vocal and active peace arm of the Catholic Church. They're lay people. They typically are lay people living in intentional community, doing really important acts with nonviolence and anti-military sort of stuff. And then there's also Catholic Workers, who you might be familiar with. They founded by Dorothy Day. They do outreach to the poor and that sort of thing. And you see a lot of gendered things happening here when you look at the studies, how women do tend to make sure the kids are taken care of. Men go out and get arrested and do public speaking and that sort of thing. And so you see this sort of gendered labor happening even in these circles. One of my friends, who's my kid's godfather, and also his wife is their godmother, they were expecting a kid, in their first child, in a very progressive social justice retreat center. It's very interesting. They run retreats for lay Catholics to focus on social justice, just bearing all this in mind. And they were talking, this was the first kid that have ever been born into this community before. And so they were trying to figure out how to balance everything. And they said, okay, well, we'll give you 2 weeks paternity leave, and then you would go half-time for 2 weeks, and then you were expected to be full-time after 4 weeks. That's paternity. And maternity leave is 4 weeks maternity leave, completely just devote your time to your kid. Or maybe it was 6 weeks. But then after that, you incorporate duties as needed. And they both kind of thought this was funky, like both of them, because they thought that spending time for both of the parents with the child is very important. And they also thought that their work that they did for the retreat center was very important. So they said, couldn't it be possible for us to both work 20 hours a week rather than one of us work 40, and then and integrate? We could, together work maybe 50 hours a week as we integrate these duties. And the community was pretty resistant to that. Even though it was going to be the same amount of hours, they didn't see why the dad needed to be with the kid. It was very fascinating. So this is how that works. These ideas are not without precedent. It's not that suddenly Catholics decided to have these ideas and mimic public life. No, it's been within theology. Casti Connubii claimed that women's involvement in the public sphere distracted her from her role as wife and mother. This had to do with the fact that procreation was seen as a primary good of marriage. So her emphasis on her biological and social motherhood was very important. But there's been a shift in understanding. Gaudium et Spes came out at Vatican II in the 1960s, and it claims that love is central to the marital relationship and that sex is an expression of love that spouses share. And it also advocates for the equality of spouses, calling marriage a unique form of friendship, and expects both parents to share the responsibility of raising the children. So it's definitely a shift that's happening. just to look at kind of like a chart of the changing notions of holy matrimony, because our ways that we think of matrimony are going to shape the way we think of family and our expectations of the whole family unit. So before Vatican II, the spousal relationship was one of patriarchy. Men were in charge and women were subordinate and expected to listen to their husbands. After Vatican II, going to the other column or other side of this chart, is not really a chart, is it? The other right side of the bullet points is partnership. We have spouse is expected to be equal in dignity, to share roles, to share authority within the house, and that sort of thing. Pre-Vatican II, intimacy was understood as sex. If you were to be intimate with your wife, or intimate with your husband, it was just a code word for having sex. After Vatican II, intimacy is seen as friendship between the spouses, as the relationship as a whole. Sex was part of it, but it was not the defining way that a married couple expressed intimacy. And finally, before Vatican II, the wedding day was seen as the sacrament of marriage, whereas after Vatican II, the whole marriage is seen as a sacrament. We are living a day-to-day sacramental reality as spouses now. So there's this the really important shifts. Some would say complete turnovers of some of these. And it really changes the way that we could think about family now. Both parents are important. That this is recognized, but parents in society loses by the gendered way that we have kind of assigned domestic duties and work duties. So caring for the vulnerable is a super important value within Catholicism. And a lot of Protestants would argue within Christianity. And non-Christians might say just within religions as a whole. But caring for the vulnerable is huge. Men, though, if they do not ever get a chance to care for the vulnerable, a lot of elder care and child care falls to the responsibility of women. So if men don't have this, they don't cultivate a nurturing side, they're really stunting their Christian development as far as finding a way to care for vulnerable people. As solidarity is another hugely important virtue for Catholicism and beyond. But if women do not engage the public sphere, don't help it to become more Christian, then her gifts as a woman are not being put into society. They're being reserved for her family only. So she does not see the way that her gifts can translate into public life, and public life needs to be transformed by her gifts. And it also makes the family appear really self-serving, right? If parents are only working for the good of the family rather than the good of the community. So these are problematic from a Christian perspective, the way that we've organized family. It has also repercussions on children's development. The breadwinner homewinner families result in sons that are active, competitive, and assertive, and daughters that are nurturing, passive, and family oriented. However, when both parents work and share child rearing, both sons and daughters are active, assertive, nurturing, and family oriented. So we end up getting a lot. So some of these traits in the breadwinner homemaker models, we can argue perhaps some of the sons have good traits and they have some bad traits. Daughters have some good traits and some bad traits. But it seems that we end up maximizing the good traits and minimizing the bad traits when both parents work, as far as they're seeing their sons, the way the sons and daughters develop. And this is not to say that if you are aspiring to this breadwinner homemaker model, or your parents did this, that they are inherently unjust. But it does require that we carefully weigh our moral choices, recognizing them, that they have implications for justice and morality, right? That they aren't just something that we should fall into, that we should be deliberate and intentional in the way that we make our choices. So equality in marriage has wide support in the church. A lot of people talk about the Catholic Church as being inherently patriarchal and abusive to women, and that might be true in some respects, but it is certainly not true in all respects. And here are some ways that it promotes equality. So beginning with Lisa Cahill, who we read a lot of, in her Equality in Marriage, she writes, neither one meaning neither husband nor wife, should be assigned to roles that carry less social value and bring less freedom, respect, or opportunity for personal fulfillment and social contribution. Hence, in marriage, as a basic human and Christian calling, equal respect, partnership, reciprocity, and shared authority should be the rule. So that's where Lisa Cahill raised in, a very influential Catholic theologian. And as far as U.S. bishops go, they have a document called Follow the Way of Love. And they write, each family couple must do what is best for them in a spirit of respect and mutuality. Especially when both spouses are employed, household duties need to be shared. So definitely saying that we need to break these traditional gendered assumptions, looking at Hochschild's work perhaps, and she might have influenced the way they thought of that. But the family, and in conclusion, the family must be just if it is to work towards social justice with integrity, right? We have to begin with a just unit if we expect the family to be able to influence social justice in any way. So social justice, and there's an organization called Raising Micah. It comes from Micah 6:8, which is what actually I have a godson named Micah who was named after this verse. It says, "What does the Lord require you but to do justice, love kindness," or love mercy, some translations say, "but to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." So how do we, as Christians, or as just people who believe in social justice, how do we bring that to the family? And that's through three main notions: discipleship, love, and domestic church. So we're going to go into these. The family is domestic church. So in order to consider how the family is a domestic church, and how it's a vehicle for social justice, we need to define what we mean by church. So the domestic church just basically says that family is the smallest unit of church. That this is the way that family begins, that is church begins as family, smallest unit of church. So we need to know, what is a church and what does church do? And then we can speak better as to like, what is family as domestic church and what does family as domestic church do? So looking at this, we have to think, what we're doing now is talking ecclesiology. That's just what does it mean to be a church? What is a church? What is church? And first, church is a mystical communion of God. Very important that we start there. And our human models and the way we discuss church are not going to ever fully capture this mystery of church. So I'm going to draw a lot on Jesuit Cardinal Avery Dulles here. He offers 6 models of church that speak to some aspect or other of this mystery. They magnify, it's important to realize, they magnify some aspects of it while they minimize or obscure others. None of these models captures the whole picture, but they are still analytically useful so long as we can remember the limits that they have within these models. So the first model he offers is the institutional model. I'm not going to go into the depth of this, but this is just basically saying that the institutional church, the bishops, the clergy, the hierarchy, and so forth, that is traditionally been taught, the church that governs, teaches, and sanctifies, the laity. This is a model that was offered to us for a long time. If you want to pause this and look at the strengths and weaknesses to this, you can. The second model is the mystical communion model. This is the model that calls attention to the body of believers, the intimacy that they share, either as the body of Christ or as people of God. Both of these phrases evoke this mystical communion model. Both of them highlight the fellowship and unity of the believers. So the emphasis, rather with the first model, institutional, the emphasis is on the clergy. With this one, it's on the whole church, all the people that are involved. You can look at the strengths and weaknesses to this one too. Church as sacrament is fairly new. Also, this mystical communion is fairly new. This is perhaps, I think, the 1930s or 40s that we've started seeing this model. So before, the institutional model was the only model we had, as far as for like maybe 400 years. This was the only model that we had to think of as church. So this came in the 30s, I believe. First is the body of Christ, meaning many parts, one body. And then people of God, I believe, came in the 40s. Church as sacrament came around in roughly the 40s or 50s as well. And this was an attempt to kind of bring these two together. So just to highlight what a sacrament is for those who don't know, sacraments are defined as efficacious signs of grace instituted by Christ and entrusted to the church by which divine life is dispensed to us. Basically, it means these are visible rites. They are rituals, right? They are visible, that dispense invisible grace. So something happens at this moment. It's not magic. It's not a waving of the wand. It is an entrance of the person through faith into a relationship with God through the church. It connects the believer with the rest of the faithful and God. So it's a huge ordeal. And the Catholic Church has 7 sacraments that it offers, beginning with baptism, and then usually reconciliation is next, and then communion. First communion, Eucharist, is after that. That's what's being displayed in this picture. And then you have confirmation, which is your final sacrament of initiation. You are a full member of the Catholic Church once you have been confirmed. And then usually people choose one or the other. Either they are married, they receive holy matrimony, or they receive holy orders. One of those two. Holy orders is the priesthood or the diaconate or the bishopric. And then holy matrimony is husband and wife. There's a few roles that you can have. Either Eastern Catholic priests can get married, they can't get married, but Eastern Catholics can be married and then become priests. Once you become married as an Eastern Catholic, you cannot then become a priest. It has to be, when you are married, you can become a priest, but you cannot be a priest and then get married. That's the little trick that you need to remember. Likewise, I believe there was another thing I wanted to say about that. Oh, deacons. Deacons are another exception. Deacons cannot deliver the sacrament of the Eucharist, but they can baptize, they can marry, they can preach and read the gospel at Mass. So there's certain things deacons can do. It's kind of like the first level of holy orders, and then the priest is the second level, and then the bishopric is the third level of holy orders. But they can be both. Again, they have to be married first and then become a deacon, ordained a deacon. You can't be ordained a deacon and then married. But so yes, that's just to explain what a sacrament is for those who don't know. The church as a sacrament, to see the church, the whole church as a sacrament, it tries to act as a bridge for the first 2 models, the institutional model and the church as community. So the church as a sacrament brings the invisible grace to the world through the visible church, right? So this unity of believers is an outward, as a church, is an outward sign of this communion of God and humanity, because sacraments are, first of all, rites that are done, second, with others. So the sacramental church emphasizes both the visible ministerial church, that's the hierarchy, the ordained, the clergy, as well as the communal aspect of everyone who's a member. So the church's sacrament is kind of an attempt to bring both of those two together. The 4th model that Dulles, of his 6 that he offers, is church as herald. And church as herald is kind of the preaching and the teaching. It's all based on the word. And being prophetic and that sort of thing. But emphasis on the message of Jesus and the scriptures. The church is the body which hears, receives, and spreads this message. Evangelization will be the primary mission of the church in this model. You can read strengths and weaknesses. And then finally, churches, or not finally, but he initially just created 5 models, and then he added this 6th model later. But so his final original models, church as servant. So this model is an underlying theme throughout church history, but it was never articulated as this is what the church does. Pope Francis is really developing this ecclesiological model more fully. When the church turns in on itself, this model warns, it can fall into theological narcissism, right? It just keeps looking at itself and wondering how to make itself better. And then it disengages the laity from public life. We don't think about what the church is supposed to do in the world, costing the church energy and the public voice it once had. So this is another model. You can read the strengths and weaknesses to this. Finally, there is the community of disciples. So after Dulles came up with his first 5 models, suddenly he was like, wait a second, like there's a way to integrate all of these. And he saw that it was coming out through some of these other church documents. The documents of Vatican II refer to church members as disciples over 20 times. And then finally, I think John Paul II was the first to refer to the church as a community of disciples, to use this phrase. And once a pope says it, then it gets taken up, and then you see it being used by bishop letters and that sort of thing all around the world. So as far as the way it tries to integrate them to the institutional model, it affirms that Jesus had many kinds and degrees of disciples, which reserves a space for special officers of the church, like the clergy. So we can have this institutional model within this community of disciples. The discipleship model points Christians to the sacraments, as the sacraments initiate disciples through baptism and confirmation, nourish disciples through the Eucharist, and heal after falling short of discipleship through reconciliation and anointing, and begin a new career of discipleship, either jointly through holy matrimony or direct service through the church through holy orders. There must be intimacy among the disciples, as this brings shared meaning to their lives and presence to one another in community. So it's also bringing together this community model. The discipleship model also offers the herald model a chance to speak to the age, standing as a prophetic witness and a rejection of the world's values when they conflict with those of Christ. And finally, while claiming that the church epitomizes church when it gathers for worship, it nevertheless would not be fully church if it did not carry the Christian mission into the world, bringing the final model of church as servant in. So you can see this is a real, I think, fantastic model if you want to integrate all of these different ideas and incorporates them. And it incorporates the strengths of the five in a way that really minimizes their weaknesses. I think it's really effective. So because I like it, I'm going to be connecting community of disciples, that specific ecclesiology, to domestic church. So so when we look at family, from the institutional model, we have the church visible. We can see who is family, right? Very clear boundaries of who is family and who is not. The mystical communion model emphasizes belonging, right? Who belongs? Who do we show care and intimacy and affection towards? The sacramental model is the visible acts that offer invisible love, which are moments of grace within the family. There's parallels to the Eucharist. Family life is blessed with commitment and unconditional love for its members. It is broken when we experience trials and loss, and it is shared through trust and friendship. So it's and it's also, just like Catholics believe that the Eucharist is the true presence of Christ, there is a true presence to one another as well. So it's pretty fantastic as far as that goes. Herald model, we teach and we learn, we admonish, we form one another. We pray together, we reflect on the good news, and we go forth to proclaim it to others. So there is definitely this idea that families form one another. And then a sense of mission too. We serve those, or servanthood. We serve those in need, both in the family and beyond. So we can see how bringing the family, or understanding the family as domestic church through a model of community of disciples explicitly can be super effective because it hits on the high notes of all of these different models. So raising disciples, a biblical call to parents. Family as a community of disciples, again, is best conceived as gathering and sending. And if you can be sent as family, all the better. Meaning the family gathers together, they nourish, they pray, they laugh, they cry, they comfort, and they do all those things that families need to do for just their members, but they also need to be sent. So that might mean, one person's really involved in an animal shelter, one person's really involved in a soup kitchen, one person's really involved in a local campaign. But it can be really cool if you guys can all find something as a family that you feel sent and called to do. That can be awesome. So using a theology of domestic church, because then you can grow the reason I emphasize this is you can grow through your ministries rather than apart. And your ministries end up bringing you close together, as opposed to having schedules you need to juggle and balance, and perhaps minimizing time that you can be together as a family. So the theology of domestic church, Familiaris Consortio, spells out 4 roles for the family. The first is forming a community of persons. Second, serving life. Third, very important for these purposes as far as servanthood goes, participating in the development of society. Oh, I spelled that wrong. The development of society and sharing in the life and mission of the church. That's the 4th one. So there is both an internal call and an external call. And the external calls can be looked at as both the greater social world and also your local parish community. So we are looking at and serving life can be, of course, within the family and external to the family. So family is in both worlds, public and private. within the domestic church model. Love is also central to the Christian message, but not romantic love. So this is important. Romantic love is important, but not necessarily to the Christian message. Instead, domestic church is a sacramental community of believers related to the wider church community. It has an integral role in fulfilling the mission of the church. So the love binds the members to one another, their shared Christian love, and it also that's Christian love should spill out beyond the family. Family is also important for subsidiarity. This is a teaching within the Catholic Church that the smallest unit of society should take care of the problem should take care of the problem at hand. So family should be really, so if there's, for example, a family next door that just had a baby and their time's a little pressed, maybe the family next door can offer to wash dishes for them or vacuum or just to bring meals to them. That sort of thing's pretty common. They shouldn't necessarily, the family shouldn't say, oh, we should start an organization that delivers meals to families and that sort of thing. They say, hey, what can we do? So the family is great for looking at small problems or small issues that might come up in the community and handling those. So also they emphasize that family is a unit of public life, not a unit. It is in the private sphere, but it is also within public life. Conceiving of marriage as a private affair is not just a Catholic problem. Let's emphasize this. This is all across American society, that the family is this small private thing that's for itself. In the 2001 State of Our Unions report from the Rutgers National Marriage Project, they found that 80% of young adults surveyed agreed that marriage is nobody's business but the two people involved. Whoa, that's crazy. So it shows the emotional depth that we give to marriage. That's awesome. But socially, it's a very shallow institution, which is not so awesome. Family as domestic church turns us away from the self-absorbed marriage to Christian love and solidarity with others. It really underscores the public role of the family, where families can actually live out the reality of church. And just to take a quote from Familiaris Consortio, by taking up the human reality of love between husband and wife and all its implications, the sacrament gives to Christian couples and parents a power and a commitment to live their vocation as lay people, and therefore to seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs and by ordering them according to the plan of God. Hooray! So it's looking that the human reality of love between spouses should foster so much care and sense of duty towards one another, as well as towards figuring out a way to bring the kingdom of God outside of their family. So it's great, both internal and external mission of the family. Love within the domestic church is so huge. It cannot be understated, right? Debate on which sacrament, there is a debate on which sacrament undergirds the domestic church. The single parent family is considered a true family and can be domestic church. So this shows that the domestic church rests not upon the sacrament of marriage, but ultimately on baptism, right? Because then it's the baptism that all of the members share. You don't need this holy matrimony to be a domestic church. However, then the other side of the debate is that marriage is a self-gift in a truly sacramental understanding. It's the self-gifting of marriage, not simply to one's spouse, but to all those outside the family as well. In this way, it makes holy matrimony a lot more like holy orders and puts those parallels up. So rather than holy matrimony bonding two people to one another and looking at each other's navels all your life, right? Holy orders, when a priest gets married, when a priest gets ordained, we don't expect him to just contemplate his own holiness for the rest of his life. We expect him to serve the world and to serve others in their own holiness. So holy matrimony, when we conceive of it as a way that you give yourself not just to your spouse but to the Christian mission, then suddenly we're like, wow, holy orders and holy matrimony are just two different ways of doing an amazing thing. But even though there is this debate of whether it rests on baptism or matrimony, we can see that the role of love is central for both. So both of these emphasize that love is key in being domestic church. Just to look at another interesting bit of a debate that goes on within Christian theology. There's this debate of agape and philia. There's different types of love that people recognize. Agape is supposed to be this love that does not have any sort of conditions resting upon it. It is love that is freely given for everyone, without any sorts of exceptions to their character or that sort of thing. It's a sort of love that we would say a love for all humanity, right? This is that sort of love. And a lot of times, some theologians will say that agape is the highest form of love, that Christ had this agapic love for the world. And then there's love of philia, and philia is very selfless and very wonderful, but it's love for a particular person, right? So it's a sense of devotion to a particular person. There has been a tradition of privileging agape over philia, and also eros. Eros is another form of love, and eros is erotic love, and it's this love that's has a sexual orientation towards it. Even if, like, for example, in an elderly couple where sexuality in its more biological sense is not so much a possibility, it's sort of this romantic sort of sensual and indeed still sexual affection towards your spouse, even if the biological capabilities are not there, or physiological capabilities. You can still have intense sexual love, and that's what eros is. So we have agape and philia, though, that we're looking at as far as a more broad sense of love. Again, tradition privileges agape over philia, but some theologians, notably Jesuit Edward Vasek, argues that philia is the only way we learn to love in the agapic fashion. It isn't until we love particular people that we can ever begin to love more broadly. And so that's why the family is so important, and that they should be bonded through both philia and agape. It's the lifelong bond between spouses in union in Christ, which is universally shared, right? We share this union with Christ, and Christ, we know, loves all. So we shouldn't just see the marriage bond as a philiac bond between two particular people, but also an agapic bond, because it's Christ. In the Catholic understanding, Christ is brought into that bond. Philia is a good that nurtures us, and we are loved in our particularity. And agape points the mature philia outward. Less than a hierarchy, we should consider the relationship that they share with one another. So Christian marriage, as opposed to non-Christian marriage, is distinguished by the presence, awareness, and active response to Christ's invitation to live a life of charity, of which such acts are a concrete manifestation of that love. So yeah, agape and philia should work together to create a sense of love within the domestic church. And just to underscore the power of philia, a lot of people, when they talk about unconditional love, Mother Teresa is one of the first people that pops into their heads. But even she really grounded herself in philia, less so than agape. And you can see this in one of her quotes. I never look at the masses as my responsibility, right? It's never this general sort of agapic love. I look at the individual. I can only love one person at a time, just one. So you begin. I began. I picked up one person. Maybe if I didn't pick up that one person, I wouldn't have picked up 42,000. The same thing goes for you. The same thing in your family. The same thing in your church, your community. Just begin. One. So here she's pointing us to just, fall in love with your fellow person who you encounter on the street. And don't worry about loving the masses, right? You can have the same sort of beauty and care through philia. So she didn't even talk about this in agapic fashion. So it's really interesting to hear different theologians and Christians of great holiness understand these issues. Philia and agape, though, we should also understand always that they work together as we live out our dual vocation of the Christian, serving both family and the world. Looking at some social science children, there was 1,000 or more. There's over 1,000 kids in the survey. They are in grades 3 through 12. We're fine if they believe that their parents worked. If they believe that their parents thought their kids were more important than their work, even occasionally if the parents had to miss something. Whole careers needed not be sacrificed. The children just needed to know that they are first. We often conceive of life as a choice. Do we choose between work or family? That sort of thing. It can also be conceived as a dual vocation, nurturing both children and work for the common good. So we see that. And Domestic Church in Familiaris Consortio says that parents are to serve both children and society, a dual vocation, not a sacrifice of one or the other, right? So we shouldn't necessarily see that we have to put one or the other first, but we see this as a dual vocation. Again, Hochschild, if you're like recalling like how she understands it, she says, we have to consider the domestic role first. And maybe you could see that this idea is our intention, but you could also see how participation in both spheres lifts up and magnifies the other. So seeing where there is tension in those two thinkers or these two ideas, and where there is overlap and insight can be very fruitful. Seeing they argue, a lot of theologians argue that family and society is a dual vocation, not a sacrifice of one or the other. So what to do? We've just discussed the meaning of church and the theology of the family. So where is social justice? That's like our final check mark in this. Theology we've got, family we've got, where is social justice? We need to rekindle what Jesus maybe had in mind by family values, right? A lot of times when people say family values, it conjures up ideas of traditional family and gender roles and no divorce, premarital sex, that sort of thing. What did Jesus had in mind when he discussed family values? And that was care for the poor and vulnerable. So let's think about these sorts of things. Let's think of it on three different levels. What churches can do, what families can do first, churches, and organizations. So families, and I'm going to go through this in a series of learn, pray, act. Families have certain things they can learn. They can learn about organizations and issues in their community and world. They can pray different prayers. There's awesome prayers that the Catholic Church has designed just for these sorts of things, like the works of mercy. There's both spiritual and corporal works of mercy to consider. The Magnificat is a beautiful part of the Bible that points us towards the wider world, and the Beatitudes as well. Think about the gifts and the fruits of the Holy Spirit, and read about the lives of the saints. In family, you can also act. You can get involved in organizations as a family. You can decide as a family what causes you should donate to. Not just having the parents do this privately, but really draw on the opinions of the children. Every Christmas, we give our children, what is it? I think it's $500 each. We have 2 kids, don't worry, not 12. And we ask them how they want to disperse their money. So sometimes it'll be like, $500 to one organization. Sometimes it gets broken up into 4 different organizations, but we give our kids that money for them to decide. And we also tell them as a family what causes we are as parents have decided to put money towards. So the idea of giving money is always a part of them and their understanding of family and Christian life. Write letters to politicians. I realized one day I could have my kids sign the letters that I write if they agreed with them. So I would read them the letters that I was writing, and they could sign them if they agreed with them. And that's kind of an awesome thing to do. We go to protests, and we canvass for candidates together that we like. And then we always go out for ice cream, because we know that all that walking is hard for them. So we always go out for some sort of treat after we do those sorts of things. Living simply is huge. Kids can give away toys and clothes and explain to their children why they're doing it and who it's going to, and why it's important to do it as Christians and just as people. And also a time issue. When you think about living simply, not just materially, but also time. A lot of families overschedule and have their kids in, like, literally, I've read lots of articles, and maybe this reflects your own upbringing, but I've read articles where kids are in like 35 activities a month. Like, that's pretty intense as far as my perspective goes. Maybe not from your perspective, but it would be hard to figure out how to also serve the wider community if you have 6 sports activities going on a month, because you've got your clubs and your regular in-season rec sports, and then you have your instruments, and then you have your tutoring, and you have all of these different things. And then it's like, wow, where's your time for just hanging out as a family even? And then also, where is your time for the community? And so it's hard to do that if you have super busy schedules. Churches, you can see how churches can do this. I'll let you pause that and read it on your own in the Teach, Pray, Act, less than Learn, Pray, Act. And then with organizations, need to kind of maybe change the way they culture of their organization's work, making room for families at Catholic and secular nonprofits, make sure you keep your anti-kid sentiments in check. A lot of times people will have these attitudes that are actually pretty much against kids, but they don't realize it. Just make sure you include things of ways that can get kids involved in. There's a lot of simple tasks that kids can help out with an organization or a church, and also expand, create family days. Like maybe you might say, oh, come, if you're a family, come to our church, or come to our, not our church, a convalescent home on December 11th. We're going to have a caroling, and families are welcome to come. And then you might just have some families who aren't really connected to other things in the community who can start to become part of your community. So yeah, it would be a great way for organizations to get people involved. And just to give you some visuals for how to be domestic church, that can just be spending some time outside together, chasing and running around, just making sure everyone feels loved and is, hey, you're getting some physical activity too. The work around the house, that should be shared. We all as a family, we clean together. And we try to have some sort of treat afterwards. Sometimes we'll walk to Wiener Schnitzel. It's just like a half mile or so away, 3/4 of a mile, and we'll get soft serve ice cream. So, just something that we do to try. Yeah, we do try to associate cleanliness with some sort of sweet bribe. It's true. But yeah, hopefully that they understand that they're giving to the family through this. And then there was this other family who I just thought was super cute. They have a family tradition of making crepes and cookies of every Christmas season, not necessarily Christmas Day, but here they are doing that. And here's some of the ways that my family does domestic church. In the upper right hand corner, that's like a little maze that our kids, or not a maze, a map that I put together. It was a treasure map. They had to run around the house collecting their different Easter eggs that had their treasures hidden inside of them, or not pieces of the map. They had pieces of the map hidden inside them, and then the map, once they put it together, leads them to their Easter candy. Like, oh wow, such a big hint. And it was like 2 Snickers bars or something, 2 Easter Snickers, and they were like stoked. So anyway, super fun. Simple ways to just spend time as a family and put effort into the family and to feel loved. If you see on the left, that's our Christmas tree. Every year we just make a ton of Christmas ornaments, and it's super fun. We spend a few days doing it, and our tree slowly becomes beautified over those days, and it's super fun. And then the bottom one is just my son. He's got long hair. He's a boy though. And he's got a picnic basket, and because he got like this little basket from like as a parting gift from a birthday party, and we were going to go to the park and have lunch there, and he's like, oh yeah, we'll make a picnic. And he said, look mama, I made us a picnic basket. And he was so cute. But anyways, just little ways to spend time together. Just instead of eating our lunch at home that day, we decided to go outside and walk to the local park, and that was super fun. Yeah, super fun. I say that a lot when I talk about my family. They're super fun. And then here's some ways to be domestic church outside of the immediate family. I guess outside of one's immediate needs. On the upper right, my daughter's dressed as Saint Lucia. We're not Swedish to any degree at all, but she read about in her American Girls book about this family that immigrated from Sweden and celebrated Saint Lucia's Day, and she had to wake up at 5 a.m. and make rolls for us. She made the rolls the night before and then baked them at 5 a.m, and then she comes in in the dark wearing this wreath of candles. It's super cute, and she's wearing a white dress that you don't see in the picture, and she has her hair up in braids, and it's super fun. Anyways, she had a blast doing it, and so yeah, that was it. So she got to serve the family in that way. Below I organized there's a winter shelter called the St. Mary's Center in Oakland, and they're really family friendly. And so there are a lot of places that are soup kitchens or shelters. They're like, oh yeah, once the kids are in 8th grade, then they can volunteer. And it's like, wow, well, by the time they're in 8th grade, if they haven't been volunteering by then, they think volunteering is not the coolest thing in the world. But if they grow up doing it, it's just a natural part of their life. It's going to be a lot more, it's going to be more natural for them to do it if it's already been cultivated as a habit. So I organized a family shelter night, and the kids all helped cook stuff at home, and then it was like potluck, and we brought it to the residents. And it's a senior center, so it's all these grandparent type age people. You have to be 55 in order to live there, and they love having the kids there because they're all these people 55 and up. And then here the kids are after the meals have been served, and they're sitting around singing Let It Go from Frozen. And the seniors really dug that. And then another thing that my daughter did on the left is she, I don't know if you've heard of the Rice Bowl. It's like a way of raising funds for like impoverished people around the world during Lent, which is like a season of sacrifice for Catholics. And so her and her brother gathered up all their old toys and books and made this poster and went to their old preschool and did like a pay what you want for all of their stuff. So like people were paying a dime, some people were paying $10 for all these different toys and clothes and books that they had brought together. And they ended up making like 180 something, maybe, yeah, 100. No, I think it was over $200. It was really insane. And then I made the mistake of saying I would match them dollar for dollar. So, yeah, so Rice Bowl made a good chunk of cash that year based on their efforts. It was super cool. All right, and our question for discussion is, what new ideas on family does this notion of family and as domestic church lend you? So what sort of ideas, how has it got you to rethink family? Does it go against some of your understandings or plans for your future family? So basically, what have you learned from this lecture? You're like, wow, that's really cool. And what if you're like, and what have you learned? Like, oh, that's not so cool. I'm planning to do this with my family. Or maybe you're like, oh, I was planning to do this, but now I've changed it. So think about ways that it's given you some new ideas and ways that it's kind of like counteracted some of your own understandings of family for your own future. So go ahead and discuss that either in our Zoom meeting or on the online group.